The meeting's live.
Thank you. So I'd like to take this opportunity to welcome everyone to this meeting, that is members, publics and speakers, on this rather chilly December evening. So for the item one is apologies for absence. I've received apologies from Councillor Bishop, Councillor Hewson, Councillor Mantle and Councillor Levitt. And having given due notice, Councillor Muir will be substituting for Councillor Levitt. Councillor Allen will be substituting, Councillor Amy Allen, should I say, will be substituting for Councillor Hewson. And I believe Councillor Bloxham will be substituting for Councillor Bishop. Are there any other apologies that have not been noted? No, thank you. Okay, item 2, the minutes for the 4th of November. I propose we take these as read and approve them as a true record of proceedings of the meeting of the 4th of November. Can I have a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Derbyshire. Are there any comments on the minutes? Can we then go to the vote on the minutes?
You're on the wrong thing.
If you don't mind, I don't think we'll retake the vote. Is that okay?
I think it's
okay. On this occasion. Okay, are you able to vote now, though, for the forthcoming items? Good.
Hang on. Yeah, we're not. Yeah, stop it.
Oh, okay. Do we want to read?
No, it's there.
I do normally abstain if I'm not there, because how can you say it was a true record? Yeah, yeah. Do we need to read? Shall we just retake that vote? Then Councillor Bryant can take it as well.
Chair, that motion is carried.
Thank you. Okay, now item 3, notification of any other business. I have none. Item 4, Chair's announcements. In accordance with council policy, this meeting is being audio recorded as well as filmed. The audio recordings will be available to view on mod.gov and the film recording via the NHDC YouTube channel. Declarations of interest. Members are reminded to make declarations of interest before an item. The detailed reminder about this and speaking rights is set out under Chair's announcements on the agenda. To clarify matters for our registered speakers, members of the public have 5 minutes for each group of speakers. That's 5 minutes for objectors and 5 minutes for supporters. And the 5-minute limit applies to member advocates as well. If this meeting goes on as late as 9, we will take a break around 9 o'clock. And we do have a part 2 item for this meeting. And when we move into that part 2, we will need to clear the room of public and press and turn off the live stream and any other recordings. And we will return to the public session to close the meeting. But the live stream recordings will not resume at that point because there won't be any further business. Notice of any decisions or comment made in the public session during that period will be published in the usual manner. And then item 5, public participation. Just to confirm our registered speakers in attendance, I think we have Claire Newbury tonight, and I can see you're here. Just the one. You're very welcome to our meeting. So without further ado, let's move on to item 6. Land east of Garden Walk and north of Newmarket Road, 19-02865 RM. And I would like to invite our officer, Sean Greaves, to present the report. Thank you, Sean.
Good evening, Chair, members. As indicated in my report, at the time of writing it, I have one update. Condition 10 hadn't been agreed by the applicant. The applicant has agreed condition 10 and accepts the need to define which layout is implemented due to the variation at the interface with the care home that's been approved, and they accept a condition of this nature. But they consider that it would be sufficient to require details of internal road layout and not necessarily other matters such as landscaping and footpaths. I agree with that. I think that the phasing plan that just refers to approving the phasing of road layout would be sufficient, and therefore I'm proposing amending condition 10 to remove reference to footpaths and landscaping. That should be sufficient to deal with that matter. This site lies on the eastern edge of Royston. The A505 Royston bypass is to the east. Residential development and a recreation ground is to the west, and Newmarket Road is to the south, with Burlow's residential development, which I believe you considered 2 weeks ago, is beyond Newmarket Road to the south. The land rises from west to east, and this is a reserve matters application. It's a version 1 of 2 versions, and I will explain the differences very shortly. Outline Planning Permission was granted in December 2016 for residential development on a site extending to around 17 hectares for approximately 330 dwellings. This counts towards the current housing land supply, which is at 1.47 years. Reserve matters have been approved for phases 1 and 2, and this is the third and final phase of reserve matters that are before you tonight. Phase 1 approved details relating to 83 dwellings, and phase 2 approved details relating to 108 dwellings. This version 1 reserve matters relates to 165 dwellings. Now, the difference between this version and the second version 2, which will be considered as item 2 tonight, is that this application includes the land for which a care home has been approved, and version 2 does not. So this application is for 165 dwellings, and therefore this scheme would deliver a total of 365 dwellings on the site as a whole. That's an additional 26 homes above and beyond what was approximately considered at the outline stage. Therefore, the proposal will make a modest additional contribution to the housing land supply shortfall. Version 2, as I said earlier, it proposes 148 dwellings, not 149 that is mentioned in the report, and I'll deal with that later. Details are submitted relating to appearance, layout, access, scale and landscaping. These are the reserve matters. Details of the footpath to the west and within the community open space to the east were approved under phase 1 and therefore are not matters for consideration this evening. Royston Town Council raised no objection subject to the footpath to the south of the site being hard surfaced. However, as I just mentioned, that matter was dealt with previously when dealing with phase 1 of the reserve matters. The local lead flood authority objected to this application. However, they're requiring more information and engineering drawings for the drainage system. This would not affect these reserve matters, and there is a separate condition of the outline permission, which is a pre-commencement condition that requires those details. I understand that the applicants are working on that, and submission to discharge that particular condition of the outline permission is pending, and we're expecting that very shortly. Could I have the slides, please? Slide 1. This is the site, and it. Could I have next slide, please? Slide 2. This is the phasing plan, which shows the 3 phases for this development. And as you can see, phase 3, which is for consideration this evening, is down in that southwestern corner of the overall site, with the recreation ground to the west. Immediately to the east of this phase is the community open space, and details related to that were approved at phase 1. Next slide, please. This is a photograph taken from the recreation ground to the west, and you're looking now towards the site. You can just see a mast popping out of the top of the trees, and that is actually within the community open space at the top of the hill within woodland. Next slide, please. This photograph is taken just within the site, just within the western boundary of the site, looking up towards the community open space and the woodland at the top of that hill. Again, you can just see the mast, which is in the woodland, popping out of the trees there. Next slide, please. This is taken also just within the western boundary of the site, looking north, and you can see to the left-hand side of that slide, houses that are being built at the moment under phase 1. And this slide also shows the slope going left to right, going west to east, and that's an indication of the slope within the site. Next slide, please. This is taken from the top of the hill within the community open space, looking down at phase 1 and the houses that are being built at the moment. Next slide, please. This is the layout plan, and this shows the layout for this scheme. Towards the northern end of the site, you can see houses, and that's in the area where there's an existing planning permission for a 72-bedroom care home. This site proposes housing as an alternative to that. The item 2 later we will see that excludes that part of the site and allows for the development of the care home as an alternative to this. The community open space is beyond the site to the east, and you can see a green edge to that community open space, which is approximately 1 in 3 incline going up to what is proposed to be chalk grassland when it's developed. There's a mix of house types with detached and semi-detached and terraces, and 2 small blocks of flats within the development, and those will provide affordable housing, those blocks of flats. The affordable housing is in terms of semi-detached and terraced houses is pepper potted throughout the site. They're not located in one particular area, so they're dispersed evenly throughout the site. Next slide, please. This is a site section which shows the slope going from west to east, and for example, the top slide is taken just below the position where the care home would be, and that shows an approximate change in levels from the west to the east of about 10 meters in difference. The houses are cut into the landform. It's been levelled out somewhat so that towards the eastern end of the site, the houses are not as high and therefore not as visible from, for example, the nearby housing to the west and the recreation ground. Next slide, please. This is the landscape master plan. This shows where, for example, which is helpful, where the play area would be. The play area is actually in phase 2 and immediately abuts phase 3, so it's quite central within the site. There's a linear open space connecting the community open space and the play area towards the northern end of the site, and that would provide a landscaped footpath between the two, a pedestrian link between the two. So, in conclusion, this proposal forms part of the current housing land supply and makes a significant contribution to that supply. As there is currently a significant shortfall in housing land supply, the tilted balance advocated by the framework applies to this application, which in this case means that the adverse impacts of the scheme would need to be demonstrably outweighed by the benefits. It's considered that the scheme is acceptable. There would be a satisfactory access within the site. The design and appearance of the proposed development would reflect that of phases 1 and 2, and those have obviously been approved and are therefore acceptable. The proposed landscaping would enhance the development. The layout has been amended to better address the sloping nature of the site, and those amendments make the scheme acceptable in this location. Thank you.
Thank you. Do members have any questions for our officer? Councillor Hunter.
Thank you, Chairman. I wonder if you could just clarify, it was quite a brief synopsis you did, reference condition 10. I'm quite used to our planning department to actually sign off any landscaping and other bits and pieces, but I couldn't quite grasp what you were trying to tell me. I wonder if you could go over that.
This is due to there being two versions of development on this site. Immediately to the south of the site of the proposed care home, there is actually a variation in the layout between version 1 and version 2. On the vast majority of the site, the two versions are pretty much identical. It's only at that point where there is actually divergence between version 1 and version 2, apart from, of course, that version 2 excludes the land for the care home. So at that point, there is a possibility, a theoretical possibility, the applicants may not intend to do this, a theoretical possibility of a hybrid approach whereby they could implement parts of version 1 and parts of version 2 at a very small, in that very small area, which would potentially create an unsatisfactory result. So this condition effectively requires them to implement one or the other and not a hybrid of the two at that point.
Thank you. Does that answer your question? Yes. Any other questions for our officer? No. Thank you. In which case, I would like to invite our registered speaker, Claire Newbury, to address the committee. Welcome. You have 5 minutes.
Thank you. Good evening. Thank you for the opportunity to speak this evening, and thank you to the case officer for his comprehensive report. My name is Claire Newbury. I work for Vincent and Gorbing, and I'm acting as a planning advisor to Vistry Homes. Vistry Homes is a subsidiary of Vistry Group PLC, which consists of 2 very strong national house building brands, Linden Homes and Bovis Homes. Vistry is one of the top 5 volume house builders in the country and holds a 5-star HBF customer satisfaction rating. As has been explained by the case officer, there are 2 layouts before you this evening, this one and the next item on the agenda. This scheme reflects the original aspirations of the outline planning application to deliver general housing with no specialist residential accommodation. The alternative version of the layout would allow the provision of the care home in the northern corner of the site. The reason for the 2 planning applications with the varied layouts is that at the time of submission, the care home application had not been determined and was subsequently only allowed on appeal. This application was therefore represented a backstop position to preserve the ability to deliver the balance of homes on the site in a timely manner should, for any unforeseen reason, the care home did not come forward. So this reserve matters application will bring forward the final phase of development on the site for 165 homes, as the case officer said, in addition to the 191 homes already delivered in phases 1 and 2, including 30% affordable housing. As part of phase 1, the council has already approved much of the strategic landscaping around the wider site edges and the extent and layout of the community open space, including the biodiversity benefits that brings to the whole site. Vistry Homes has so far built out approximately 100 homes, some of which you can see on the photographs there, and is aiming to complete the development within the next 3 or so years. The development has enjoyed strong rates of sales throughout so far, and the customer satisfaction survey scores have remained at 100% throughout, giving the development a 5-star HBF rating. You will note from the case officer's presentation that the majority of the wider site is fairly flat. However, there is a significant level change in the southeast corner where the community open space is located. In determining the outline application, it was considered appropriate to limit the buildings to below the 80-metre contour line to ensure that the development of the site does not have an adverse visual impact on the wider views of the landscape surrounding Royston. So to restrict development below the 80-metre contour line was a guiding principle when developing a layout for phase 3. The levels within the site have also guided the layout of the main streets and the orientation of the dwellings. The main routes follow the contours of the site to make the most efficient use of the land, whilst still ensuring an acceptable residential amenity and conforming with the Highway Authority design requirements. The design team have met with the previous case officer and the landscape and design officer on a couple of occasions to discuss how the layout could appropriately address the level changes and the relationship with the community open space while still making efficient use of the site. Following these meetings, amendments were made to the scheme, and which included further ground remodeling to soften the relationship between the dwellings and the community open space, with the finished floor level of some units on the eastern side of the site being reduced by some 3.5 meters to graduate that slope. Also, longer garden depths were introduced of up to 12 meters along within some of the plots to ensure acceptable back-to-back relationships and secure good residential amenity. The amendments made during the course of the application have delivered a well laid out scheme which will provide an attractive landscape neighbourhood that responds appropriately to the topography and meets or exceeds all the development management policy requirements. As an allocated site, this phase will make an important contribution towards the council's 5-year land supply.
You have 30 seconds left.
And deliver an attractive development which will make a positive contribution to Royston. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Do members have any questions for our speaker? No? Councillor Hunter.
It's a difficult one, actually, because I've listened to the explanation about why we've got two versions in front of us. Do I take it, though, the developer is primarily more interested in getting the care home and then not getting it? Because obviously, I know that concerned a great deal of the members at the time, that they thought there was such a great need for it. I'm just wondering whether or not this is belt and braces or just making sure in case they can't get a actual somebody to run it and take it over. I'm just hopeful that they're still intending to build a care home.
Are you able to answer that or not? That's quite difficult, isn't it? I mean, you do now have the planning permission has now been granted for 2 versions, I believe, of the care home as well.
Yep, there's a version that was allowed on appeal and a subsequent version, I think, which is recently
that we granted at planning.
Approved,
yeah.
I think basically what we can say at this time is that Vistry are in kind of final detailed negotiations with the care home provider. So as we stand at the moment, the intention is that will come forward subject to those negotiations on the land deal being finalised.
Okay, thank you. I think that's a fair enough answer. Are you happy with that, Councillor Hunter? Yeah. Any further questions for our speaker? Okay, in which case I'll move to debate. Who would like to speak? Anybody? Or are there any questions that our officer would like to address? Have you got anything you want to comment on that's been said by the public speaker?
No, I've no comments on that.
Can I just ask you one question? You mentioned affordable housing, and I imagine that's been that may have been agreed earlier, but can you just clarify? It's affordable, not social. Is that correct?
That's correct. I understand it's affordable housing. That's part of the Section 106 agreement, and the tenure mix, etc., has been agreed as part of the Section 106 agreement.
Thank you very much. So that's already been agreed. So who would like to speak? I've got Councillor Hunter.
Thank you kindly, Chairman. I wonder if our officer could give me an assurance on the topography, because there has been some previous problems with actual height of buildings and overlooking. Are you happy with this particular layout and confident that it can produce no overlooking or causing any problems around the area?
Yes, the scheme was amended, as mentioned earlier in March 21, to address issues raised by officers with regards to the relationship of dwellings to each other, the distances and the difference in heights between back-to-back dwellings. Those relationships were improved by that amendment, and the amendment addressed those concerns.
So I think those concerns have been satisfied in the view of our officer. Anybody else like to speak? If there is no further debate, I think I'm going to propose that we accept our officer's recommendation to grant. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Hunter, thank you. Prepared to second? Yes. Okay, let's go to the vote.
Chair, that motion is carried.
Thank you. So we'll move on to item 7, which is version 2 of this applications of this site, 1902886 RM, and I'll ask our officer to present the report.
Thank you. Yes, once again, there's an update with regards to condition 10, because the same condition is recommended on this application as well. And condition 10 requires a phasing scheme to be submitted to ensure effectively that either version 1 or version 2 is implemented, not a hybrid of the two at the interface between the care home site and this site. The applicants questioned the inclusion of reference to footpaths and landscaping. And as I indicated previously, I agree that landscaping and footpaths can be removed from that condition, and that it just require phasing details relating to internal road layout to make sure that a hybrid approach isn't applied in that part of the site. This application is version 1 version 2, sorry, for phase 3 of this site, and it proposes 148 dwellings, 17 less dwellings than version 1. That's because it excludes the land for which planning permission has been granted for a 72-bedroom care home. Details of the footpaths to the west and the community open space to the east, once again, were approved as part of phase 1, and therefore they're not a matter for consideration in this application. Royston Town Council raised no objections to the scheme, subject to a footpath to the south of the site being hard surfaced. As mentioned previously, this lies outside the area for this phase of the development and was approved at phase 1 of the development. And also the local lead flood authority objected to this application, but their concerns will be addressed with the discharge of condition 7 of the outline permission, which is a pre-commencement condition that requires the approval of drainage. The LLFA's concerns relate principally to information and don't affect the layout, which is a matter for consideration in this reserved matters application this evening. Could I have the first slide, please? This shows this layout for this scheme, and as you can see, to the north of the site, the land is excluded from this application, and you can see the outline of the approved care home. Next slide, please. Once again, this is the phasing plan that shows the location of phase 3 down in that southeastern end of the site, with phases 1 and 2 to the north, and the community open space to the east of this site, and recreation ground to the west. Next slide, please. This is the same photograph that you saw previously, because this is just another version of development on the same site. And this shows the site from the recreation ground looking east towards the site, You can't really see the slope because of the trees on the western edge of the application site, and later photographs will show the slope heading up towards the woodland in the southeastern corner of the community open space. Next slide, please. Again, this was taken just inside the western boundary of the site for phase 3, and that's looking east up the hill towards the woodland in the corner of the proposed community or the approved community open space. Next slide, please. This slide is looking north. You can see that slope heading from west to east, and in the western corner, the houses that are currently under construction in phase 1. Next slide, please. And finally, with regards to photographs, this site is looking down on phase 1 from the community open space, and you can see that to the right of that slide is the edge of the roundabout onto the A405 coming into the development. We're looking actually down on the site of the approved care home, which would be in front of that row of houses there. Next slide, please. This is the site layout, and as you can see, there's a white outline of the care home to the north. And the land immediately to the south of that, the layout is slightly different from that on version 1, but the rest of the site, the layout is well identical to the layout in version 1. You can see the green band of trees along that eastern boundary, which is the edge of the community open space, and phases 1 and 2 are shown to the north. In the northwestern corner to phase 3, just beyond the site, there is the play area, which will serve the site as a whole. And there will be links, a footpath link through from the community open space through to that play area. Next slide, please. Again, we have cross sections of the site, and you can see the difference in the slope. You might not be able to pick up the red line within that plan that shows the existing landform, the existing height, but the dwellings have been cut down into the land so that the dwellings towards the eastern end of the site would not be as high within the development, and therefore not as prominent when viewed from land to the west. Next slide, please. And this shows the landscape master plan, and that shows the development as a whole, the community open space in that southeastern corner, phase 3, which is coloured on this landscape master plan, and the phases 1 and 2 to the north. As I indicated in the previous item, this proposal forms part of the current housing land supply and therefore makes a contribution to that supply. There's currently a significant shortfall in housing land, well below the required 5 years, and therefore the tilted balance applies to this application as it would to others, which in this case means that the adverse impacts of the scheme would need to be demonstrably outweighed by the benefits. I consider that the scheme is acceptable. There would be satisfactory access within the site. The design and appearance of the proposed development would reflect that of phases 1 and 2 and are acceptable. The proposed landscaping would enhance the development. The layout has been amended to better address the sloping nature of the site in terms of the relationship between the dwellings and the junction with the community open space. And those amendments make this scheme acceptable in this location. Thank you.
Thank you. Do members have any questions for our officer? No. In which? Oh, Councillor Muir.
I might have missed it in the report, but there's no mention of cycleways. And on new developments like this, you've mentioned footpaths, no cycleways.
Can you address that, please?
There would be cycleway access within the footpaths to the west of the site, and you'll be able to gain access by cycleway to the site from those cycleways that link in from the north and the south.
Footways in the scheme will be wide enough and segregated for pedestrians and cycle on the same path.
Be sufficient for cycle use. The only footpath that where cycle use would not be encouraged is within the community open space to the southeastern corner. There, the footways would only be mown grass rather than hard surfacing. It's hogging, which is a mix of sand, clay, and gravel on the footpath stroke cycleways along that western boundary to the site. We're not encouraging particularly access to the community open space because the main reason for that space is to reintroduce chalk grassland and enhance biodiversity. So if you encourage cyclists and pedestrians into that area, there is conflict with enhancing biodiversity interest in that area. So yes, there would be cycle access into the site and within the site along obviously the roads within the site as well.
Yeah. Okay, thank you for that. My understanding is that within a residential site like this, the roads would be sufficiently low volume traffic for cycles to be quite safe. It's just accessing it from outside that's the issue. And much like Thurfield Heath bans cycles on the chalk grassland. I know that's an SSI, but even on the common land, they are not allowed. It makes sense that you don't encourage cycling on a piece of chalk grassland. Okay, Councillor Bryant.
On the same subject, this week there was the consultation for LWIP about the cycle paths with the proposed maps for Royston as part of that. And what they did mention was that in fact they'd not made any attempt to actually join up with developments which are in train or which will be in the future. And it was up to the developers to do it from their end. I was wondering if we could take that into account.
Do you want to address that or? Okay.
Knowledge of that.
Okay, well, I was at that that presentation about the local cycling and walking infrastructure plan for people that don't know what LUSW, whatever that acronym is. I think the question that was asked, yes, that was said. And I think I actually do cycle to this development already, and there is quite good cycling access via Garden Walk into the site. So personally, as a cyclist myself who cycles around town all the time, I'm satisfied that there is cycling into there. And I'm also satisfied about the footpaths that have been agreed under the outline plan previously. So I think there shouldn't be a problem because people won't have to go along Newmarket Road to cycle into town. They can go along Garden Walk, which admittedly is quite busy in school time, but I think it's okay. And then there is a proposal to actually build a cycleway along Newmarket Road if funds allow, if it's prioritised. It's one of the ones that's on the plan, but who knows how many will actually be built. But it's a really good question because connectivity with cycleways is really important, and often they're built and then they don't connect to anything, which isn't really very helpful. But I think in this case, there will hopefully be pretty good connectivity from my local knowledge. I hope that answers your question. Yes. Okay. Councillor Tyson.
Yeah, could I just continue on the cycling theme? I was just wondering, and this came up a little bit when we were talking about this area before, that is it the case that the gradients involved would be off-putting to some less able cyclists? And we're quite keen to promote the use of sustainable transport, but if this whole development is at the top of a very steep hill, it's not going to be very easy for people to access it from the town. So I was wondering if there was anything that could be done to encourage or to help people, for example, who were thinking of investing in electric bikes to access the dwellings up there. Which led me to think that it might be possible to ask that there be, where there are cycle stores that are individual to the houses, that those be equipped with a power point. to make it easy to charge e-bikes.
Okay, so are there PowerPoints within cycle storage?
That would have had to have been a requirement of the outline planning permission rather than a matter for reserved matters. And and that was not a condition. A condition was not imposed on the outline permission requiring electric vehicle charging points.
Okay, but I think it is an important point for future applications that the planning committee members need to be aware of, because obviously e-bikes are becoming more popular, but they are fairly recent. Sort of the uptake has been very great since lockdown, I think. But just to clarify on this site, the steepest part of the site is going to be open space. I cycle around this site all the time and it's not a problem on a push bike. I can assure you. But it is a good question around charging. Thank you. Are there any further questions? Can I therefore invite our public speaker, Claire, to address the committee for a second time? Welcome. You have 5 minutes.
Good evening again. And thank you for approving the last application. As I think the case officer has already outlined, the scheme is very similar to the previous application with the same challenges that have been overcome. The scheme will deliver 148 units and with 30% affordable. The reason for this application is to allow the care home to come forward in the northern part of the site, and we've already discussed planning permission has been approved for that. And the mixed tenure and layout will reflect the same, version 1 as except for the site of the care home. And we had the same discussions with the previous officers in relation to how best we could address the layout and the site levels and the relationship with the community open space. Discussions also resulted in changes to the layout where it addressed the boundary with the care home, so that they included the ground remodeling and the reorientation of some of the units with the care home to deliver an acceptable relationship, both in terms of design and amenity. These changes did result in the reduction of 1 unit from the kind of original submission. But in all other aspects, this layout is the same as version 1. Just to pick up on the kind of cycle routes and cycle path provision, we did secure planning permission for a new shared surface footpath cycleway that will run from the bottom corner of phase 3 through the recreation ground onto Newman Close, I think it is, which was a requirement of the original section 106, which is there to be delivered, which provides an additional link in terms of the local cycle routes. And just to pick up on the gradients point, one of the big issues about the whole layout, and as I said previously, that the roads through the development have followed the levels within the site to ensure that the gradients of the roads are acceptable to the Highways Authority, and that includes obviously for the purposes of cycling. Yep, that's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you for addressing those additional issues. I think that's really helpful. Do members have any questions for our speaker? Councillor Muir.
Thank you. I think I should have asked this of the officers. I don't see anything in this application or the previous for electric vehicle charging points. I thought we had a policy that all new applications now have charging points.
Would you mind addressing that?
Yes, the outline planning permission was issued in 2016, and at that point, I don't believe EV charging points were being required. It will be a requirement when the now, and certainly when the local plan is adopted, that all new development, and the government is seeking to introduce that as a requirement generally, that all new houses are fitted with EV charging points.
Yeah, so it's because of the length of time that this has taken to come from outline planning to reserve matters and policy changes in the meantime, I think. Yeah, so it's regrettable, but yeah, it's already been dealt with. But going forward, we definitely are putting EV charging points everywhere. Okay, are there any further questions? In which case, well, let's move to debate. Who would like to speak? Anyone like to speak? Councillor Hunter.
Thank you, Chairman. In all aspects, this is almost identical to the previous one, except for the care home. So I'll happily propose the officer's recommendation.
Thank you. Do I have a seconder? Well, I don't know who was first. Councillor Derbyshire, I think. Okay, the second. Can we go to the vote then, please?
Chair, that motion is carried.
Thank you very much, and thank you to our speaker. And if you would like to leave now, you can, or you might want to stay for the next item. It's the same. Sorry, my mistake. Okay, let's move on to item 7 then. No, item 8. Get this right. So this is a section 73, 2102.194/S73, and it's on the same site. And I'm going to invite our officer Tom Allington to present this report.
Thank you, Chair. I do have one quick update before I move on to my presentation. At 2.7 of the report, it refers to the comments of the lead local flood authority, who had at that time been reconsulted but hadn't commented. They have since confirmed they have no objection. That's my only update. This application is effectively a result of discussions between the applicant and Herts County Council Highways regarding detailed section 38 highway works and some of the required changes. So this is effectively an amendment to phase 1. The original approval, reserved matters approval, I believe was May 2018. Like I say, through the sort of detailed highway works, they're now looking to make just a couple of small changes. This is to widen a curve in the road to allow better bus access towards the northern part of the site. And that final northern section of the Spine Road would become one way to allow just buses through to Garden Walk beyond. If we could just move on to the slides, please. So this plan should look familiar from the previous discussions. The detailed layout, that is phase 1. You can see the attenuation pond at the far northwest corner. It's the road that wraps to the east of that, which is what we're looking at primarily, where the changes are. If we can move to the next slide, please. This is an aerial photograph provided by the case officer. So the area in question is highlighted with the red circle. Next slide, please. And then this is like a photo montage of the corner in question. So you can see the attenuation basin on the left there and those final northern plots on the right. And it's that curve there where I believe the Highway Authority have raised concerns regarding the front of buses as they swing around that corner, overhanging the grassed area. So Highways have requested that curve effectively be widened. If we move on to the next slide, please. This is looking west towards Garden Walk. This would only be allowed, only buses will be able to access this, and only in that one direction. So buses will go through the site, south to north, through to Garden Walk. Next slide, please. And then attenuation pond is on your right, housing on your left. So the buses would come towards the person taking this picture. If we can move to the next slide, please. Sorry, it's rather small. That's a tracking plan showing how buses would use that route. So like I say, So buses would come in from the southeast of that picture. They would then turn north. That's where the road needs to be widened. And then that section will become one way. So only buses and those final 3 houses, so the occupants of those final 3 houses, will be able to access this part of the site. Moving to the next slide. Sorry, that's then done. As mentioned, we don't have any objections from the lead local flood authority. We don't have any objections from the Herts County Council Highway Authority. Therefore, this variation to the reserve matter is recommended for approval. Thank you.
Thank you, Tom. Can I just ask one question, which I don't think is particularly pertinent to this application, but interests me, and that is, you say it's one way going to the north with the bus. Will cycles be able to come in the opposite direction? You don't know the answer, maybe?
I don't know the answer to that,
Right.
no.
I'm very interested in the answer to that.
Cyclists would be able to dismount and walk, I presume.
Yeah, but cyclists don't like doing that. Okay. So are there any other questions for our officer? No. Amy? Councillor Allen?
There's a school to the north of this site, isn't there? Is that road changing from 2-way to 1-way, did you say, or is it going to be carrying on being a 1-way area?
Do you want to answer that?
Road to the north lead to Garden Walk.
Yeah, the access into Garden Walk is for buses only.
It is buses
in one way.
Is it? Will it be coming now, or is that now?
I think it already was that for buses, but in terms of this restricts other vehicles.
So I was just thinking of if you've got a new development full of houses, full of families, and there's a school there, and then there's a restricted access. Would that possibly not cause a problem for people like that wanting to get to and accessing the school? Or
As I say, I believe the original approval was just for buses to go through to Garden Walk anyway. And as previously discussed on the previous applications, we're trying to encourage people to walk and cycle rather than drive to school.
Can I just comment on that? I think when we originally discussed this site, there was a lot of, and I think Councillor Hunter will be able to back me up on this, there was a lot of residents' concern if that was made a through route for vehicles, because Garden Walk is very busy. It has, well, it's now one school, but it was a middle school and an upper school that's now a through school. And then it has another primary school off that road as well. And it can get very busy. So we wanted to discourage through traffic, or residents were very keen to discourage through traffic. So that's why it's going to be access for buses, cycles and pedestrians only. I think that's correct. I don't know whether Councillor Hunter, do you have anything to add on that?
Yes, it's quite an interesting one, actually, because I'm just sitting here thinking, if you remember, there's also some work being done with highways for the actual access itself to be either a bollard or linked to a camera, so only certain vehicles can actually go through that entrance. Because also the idea was that emergency vehicles could also access the site if needed.
Yes, that's correct. I believe that emergency vehicles will also be included in the access. Any further questions? No? Would anybody like to speak? Councillor Derbyshire.
Happy to propose that we approve it as per officer's recommendations, Madam Chairman.
Councillor Derbyshire. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Tyson. Happy to second. Let's go to the vote then.
Chair, that motion is carried.
Thank you very much. So we'll now move on to item 9, which is the planning appeals report. And I'm going to, oh, sorry, should I let people go first? Should we have a brief pause while I let officers and speakers leave? Okay. We'll move on to item 9, the planning appeals report. I'll invite our officer Simon Ellis to present.
Thank you, Chair. As you can see on appeals, all we've got to report this time is 2 householder appeals lodged So we don't have any decisions to discuss this evening. So not much to report on appeals, Chair.
Thank you. Any questions on that one? No. Item 10, the current enforcement actions. This is in, I don't think there are any members of the public remaining, but this is in the public part. I'm going to invite Simon to report on this.
Thank you, Chair. Now, this report is a public report, as you mentioned, Chair. And what's going to happen is there will be quarterly updates on enforcement matters. What we did, some members will recall that we used to do this in part 1 many years ago. And but what's happened is we've tightened up the procedures around enforcement, and we were reporting to executive members. And now we've decided that we want to widen that and report to planning committee. But the public report, what that shows is that's going to show you the list of enforcement notices that were served in the preceding period, because an enforcement notice is a public record and there's nothing there that's confidential. So when a notice is served, it's in the public domain, and all the associated documents with that are redacted with any personal data are also public documents as well. So you can see that in the preceding 2 years, there has only been 3 enforcement notices served by the enforcement team. There have been lots of breach of condition notices served, but they're not listed here. But that doesn't mean that there's been no work. The outcome of enforcement is not always a notice. In fact, the serving of an enforcement notice is almost an admission of failure on behalf of the enforcement service, because what you try to do in enforcement is resolve matters through negotiation or resolution through planning applications. And if you're resorting to an enforcement notice, it means that communication has broken down. So don't be alarmed by the fact there's only 3 notices on there. That doesn't mean we've not been doing any work in enforcement. It just means that only on 3 occasions have we resorted to formal notices. You'll see the top notice has already expired, and that I'll discuss that later. The second notice, which is 15 Western Way, Baldock, was actually allowed on appeal. If you can see that, their appeal decision on the right-hand column. And then the bottom notice, we were successful on appeal, but as you can see, the compliance date is 21st of July 2022, and that's at the bottom of the table. So whilst that enforcement notice is successful and was allowed on appeal, we can't take any further action until that compliance period is expired. Hope that explains that table, Chair.
Thank you. Are there any questions on those? No? In which case we'll move on to item 11, which is exclusion of press and public. I propose that under section 100A of the Local Government Act 1972, the press and public be excluded from the meeting on the grounds that the following report will involve the disclosure of exempt information as defined in paragraphs 5 and 7 of Part 1, Schedule 12A of said Act as amended. Can I have a seconder? Councillor Derbyshire, thank you for seconding. Can we go to the vote?
Chair, that motion is carried.
Thank you. So I believe there are no public in the room, but can I ask that the live stream and recordings are discontinued, please? And can you confirm when that's been done?
Louis, can you turn off the live stream,
The
please?
live stream has ended. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. So we'll now move on to item 12, planning enforcement in part